Welcome to Whachacha's Tabletop World, a channel devoted to the love of board gaming. My name is Sweetness Whachacha, and today we're looking at things in rings. Things in rings is a game that you can play competitively or cooperatively. So first let's take a look at the components, and then we'll get into those two game modes. The game comes with these 3 rings here that you can make loose rings. You'll be creating a Venn diagram. I'll show you that in a minute. And these are to remind you like what each of the circles are, mean with their such as context, attribute, or word. And then on the backs you can either play that way or you can flip them over. And it gives you a little descriptor. Context about the position or use of the object in society, attribute about the physical properties of the object, and word about the structure of spelling. So the word would be something like, if it has 2 O's in a row or 2 vowels in a row, or it starts with a vowel, or it starts and ends with the same letter, something like that. Attributes, like if it's something like, is it flammable or what, something like that. And then context would be like something like, well, this is something that, well, an example here makes a good gift related to sports, something like to that effect. And then none, and I'll get into that in just a second. You're going to get a whole stack of cards. There's like a huge amount of cards in here. And they're just all different things. Now they have colors on them and stuff, but that doesn't matter for gameplay. And there's a little piece of art, so it'll show you like stoplight, a picture of a stoplight, and sometimes that'll be helpful, to help people to understand a little more. There's some more esoteric kind of ideas or whatever that that you might want to have a little more clarification on. Other than the things cards, you'll have the rings cards. And these are going to be coming in 3 varieties. You're going to get, one for each of these. So one for the context, one for the attribute, and one for the word and attribute. And then at the bottom, they're going to show the difficulty. So they go to easy to difficult, 1, 2, or 3. And so you can kind of like pick, you can either do all 3s, all 1s, or you can mix and match to your heart's content to make it easier or more difficult. So in the competitive game, one player will be the knower, and they're going to be sort of running the game. They can't win. And then you're going to have the finders, and those players are going to be competing to try to empty their hand out. Everybody's going to have 5 cards, and the goal is to get rid of all of those cards. The first player to do that is going to win the game. So everyone's going to get 5 cards dealt to them. This is from the knower's point of view. This is going to be his hand. Your hands are going to be kept secret. And then, as I say, you can pick the difficulty by doing 1, 2, or 3 stars here on the backs of these cards. The other way to gauge the difficulty is to decide whether you're going to use 1, 2, or 3 rings. It kind of seems a bit silly to not use all 3 rings, since the Venn diagram is the the big hook of this, and I'll go more into that in a moment. But you can play with less than 3 rings. It seems a bit silly to me, but you can do so. Of course, if you were only playing with the blue ring here, you wouldn't draw cards for these 2. But we're going to do the regular 3 game here. And as you see, I put these reminders here, and I place them in a Venn diagram style. Now, the knower is going to know these 3 rules. And the finders are attempting to, deduce what the rules are in order to empty their hands out. So the finder is going to have these 3 rules, and they're going to place 3 cards to start. The knower's goal is not really to trip up the players. You're trying to kind of help them. You're facilitating the entire game. And so you're going to place cards, and you're going to answer questions based on your ability to kind of like help the players along. You can't actually win yourself, so you're just kind of like facilitating the game. Now, one important thing I mentioned was the Venn diagram. Now, I'm not going to explain, really go into depth what a Venn diagram is, but it's generally these 3 rings, and each area that they overlap is an area that, an item that's within there would overlap. So if you look at this example I'll place on the screen, you can see that's how a Venn diagram works. If you want a little more information, I would go ahead and look that up. It's not a totally difficult, concept to understand, but if you need to, please do look up Venn diagrams. So I actually redealt my hand because so it was a little easier to explain the concept of this. Okay, so the knower is going to go ahead and place 3 of the items following the rules of a Venn diagram. So the stoplight, so I'll pick 3, and of course this is my hand is secret, but I'm going to say, okay, stoplight, it will drop, it hurt if you dropped on you, it does not have an R, and you would not expect to find it in a office. So it will go in here just in the blue area. An eraser, you would expect to find it in the office, and it has an R. Probably would not hurt if it dropped on you. So that's going to be the red and the blue, or excuse me, the red and the yellow, which I just realized would go here. Okay, so I didn't quite make my Venn diagram very good. And then let's take the jar here, has an R, would drop it hurt on you, but you wouldn't find it enough, so that's yellow and blue. So I'll place that one there. I'm going to discard the other two cards, and then the game is ready to begin. So let's take a little bit of a look what that might look like. Now, these three cards, of course, we know are hidden, because this is for the knower to know alone. So this player might say, okay, I'm going to place the lemon here, okay, in the context. He doesn't really know, right? And so you'll look at, as the knower will look, and you'll say, expect to find it in the office. He'll say no. So he'll say, that's not correct. Let's see, it doesn't have an R, probably not hurt if it dropped on you, so it actually goes in the none. So this player's turn would be over, play would pass to the next player. So looking at another player, hopefully they'll do a little bit better. Let's say they say, okay, well, I'm going to put the stapler where the eraser is. Maybe that's good. And you'll look and you'll say, okay, well, the knower will look and he'll say, okay, well, it has an R, right? So it belongs in the yellow. You expect to find it in office, and would hurt if you dropped on you. So yeah, it probably would hurt if you dropped on you. So they would move it to here. That player would be out of luck, so they'd have to draw another card, and play would go to the next player. Hopefully the third player here will have a little better luck, so he says, okay, the television I'm going to put up here, and the knower will say, okay, would hurt if it dropped on you. You probably wouldn't expect to see a television in an office, and it doesn't have an R, so I'll say, okay. Now this is where it comes in a little bit with a knower. You got a little wiggle room, right? Because you could probably argue that, yes, that might be able to be found in an office, but generally I think you try to go with a general interpretation. So that's my interpretation. Then the player's down to 4. Cool, they get to go again. So let's say they say, okay, I'm going to say chopsticks here, right? Well, that's the knower would look and consult this and realize that's not the place, and he would move it to probably over to none. That player would draw another card, but you can see he's now down to 4 cards, so a little bit closer to victory, and the next player would act again in turn order. First player to run out of cards, as I said, will win the game. So play like that will continue round after round after round until one player has emptied their entire handout. Over the course of the game, you're getting a little bit more information. You're trying to deduce why things are going in certain spots so that you can better empty your handout. First player to do so, as I said, will win the game. Now we're going to take a brief look at how the co-op variant is played. So this is a setup for the knower. And again, you can choose 1, 2, or 3 rings, and then of course 1, 2, or 3 stars for either of the rings that you're playing with. So the difficulty, again, it's the same exact thing as a competitive game. The knower will have 10 cards, and now you're actively trying to help the player, okay? And you're going to put out 1 card per player in the game. So if it's you and 1 other player, that's 2 players. So let's say this would go into, I'll place this in, has exactly 1 vowel. Not really either of those other ones. Orange, most people have it at home, usually a single color, so blue and red over here. Okay, so now you placed and you're ready to go. Now the difference is now the finder is going to play just like normal. They're going to place one in somewhere in the Venn diagram, and then you will either it's correct, so like if they placed it, they placed a dress here, and now I say, okay, that has exactly 1 vowel, so it should be over here. Most people have it home. So it should actually be in here. Okay, so that will be incorrect. Now, that player would draw another card. Their turn would be over. And now I would have to place out another card, okay? The knower would have to place out another card. Then it goes back to the finder. So this is your clock, right? So you could technically win in one go. They could put all 5 of their cards out at once, which probably wouldn't happen. But every time you go, you're burning a card that basically is giving them a little more information. However, that's giving them, their clock is running out. That's how you play the cooperative version of the game. You're working together. You're placing items out, hoping to give the other player some clues. Generally, like maybe the word clues. Or the nature of the structure of the spelling of the word can help a little bit. You try to do things like, and maybe put multiples in each of those areas so that you're giving more information to that other player. And they're hoping to empty their hand out as you're working together. And that's the co-op. Okay, so what are my thoughts? Well, let's look at the theme and components. Firstly, theme. There's no real theme, so we can skip that. The components themselves, it's a pretty inexpensive game, and they're well done. I like these little reminders, like for the Venn diagram, to remind you like about the word context or the attribute, etc. So those are kind of little extra things that are nice. There's a big, healthy, big stack of cards. This is like most of them, but there's still some more over here as well. And then because there's so many of the clue or context cards or whatever, the rules, that's like exponentially like quite a lot in terms of how each of those are used. So one concern of a game like this is like, hey, are we going to burn through the cards and we're not going to have, we're going to keep seeing the same cards over again? Well, no, you won't, and if you do, it doesn't matter anyway, because they're just, there's so many different contexts they can be used in. So I like that. They all also have art on them, which I think is really kind of cool, because I would just have expected this just to say like dog, but it's got a little picture of a dog, and it's completely unnecessary, and it's kind of extra, which I liked. I think is a really nice little touch. It does help you sometimes though, like there's well, first of all, I do like the art. It's kind of whimsical. It's a little like looks like kind of like a kid's book, like a Dr. Seuss or something. But I do like the fact that it's there, and it can help you a little bit. Like, there was like a mermaid, and you're like, well, is the mermaid dangerous? That was one of the clues or something. And I was like, but I'm like, oh well, she's not, because she's like collecting garbage out of the ocean. So she's a nice mermaid, so we don't have to be threatened by her. So that kind of helps to clarify, etc., which is kind of cool. Gives you a little leg up. Not for the mermaid; she has no legs, but yeah. So it's kind of a little extra thing I liked and was unlooked for. The only thing, these rings, I mean, they're nice big rings, and they're it's kind of like a minimalistic approach, very small box, much less expensive. However, like, I don't know if it's just my brain, how I think and work, but like, it would have been much easier to see this on a classic Venn diagram style where you could see the altering of the colors. When I'm looking at them, like, wait, where are this? Is this square here? Even when I was kind of showing the rules, I think I had to move one of the strings over. So it's not that intuitive for me personally. So that was one thing where I wish that maybe I would have had a board. Of course, it would have been more expensive. The game would have a larger footprint, etc. So it's a bit of a trade-off. So there's the competitive, and there's the cooperative, and then of course there's the knower role and the finder role. Okay, so let's think about the knower role. The knower, to me, like in a competitive game, like I don't like that kind of role in a game. Even in a game like, I always think of it as like the dungeon master. Like it's like you're running the game for your friends, and a lot of people do like doing that. I always feel like one player has got to kind of sit out and just run the game, and I always feel like that's a bit of a ding, because like if I'm the knower, I'm just going to be like, okay, like I'm helping and I'm facilitating the game, and I'm just hoping for my turn to come around. And most games, like everybody can have a turn, you don't have to have one player just running the game. So I think for me, that's kind of a little bit of a knock against it. And this game in general, there's a lot of really interesting things about it, and there's a lot of things that are like not so, that are a little bit problematic like that. When it's your turn to be the knower though, like somebody will place a card, it's very easy. You look at your 3 cards, it's really easy to like look at it and say, okay, like, does it follow this, no, okay. And then you can like adjust it. From the finder perspective, it's really very, very, very difficult to figure out the rules. You'll probably never come close. Maybe the one with the word structure or whatever, that one is probably the only one that you'll get. The rest of them are like, seem really difficult to intuit, because, there's not a ton of items there, and, it could be there's like anything you could possibly think of could be linking these things together. So it tends to be, you just kind of go with your gut. You're like, well, there's a couple of buildings here, or there's like a couple of food items here. I think I'll kind of go with that. So, I like, I guess that's not super exciting to me, like, because I'm kind of like, I feel almost like, Dixit's a really popular game. I don't really generally like, this isn't a review of Dixit, but I kind of feel like I'm like, am I right? Okay, cool. Am I wrong? Okay, whatever. I don't have a huge investment in when I'm putting things. And as the game goes along, it gets a little bit easier to kind of figure things out. But it seems exceedingly hard to get those, to understand really what the goals are. I think of maybe I should have talked about this before, but there is a game. It feels like a bit of a twist on the game. This game, Zendo, I believe it's called. You have all these like pyramids, and different sizes and shapes and different quantities. And someone will, much like this game, they'll set up like their pyramids according to like a rule that they have. And then every player will kind of like try to build something, and then the person will say yes or no. And they're trying to get the rule. It's stripped down because it's just one rule. And they're actively like sort of, is this it? Is this it? Is this it? And then they're trying to get the rule. And so it's kind of a twist on that, but it's a little more complicated. But it uses this Venn diagram, and I don't really know any other. It's really fascinating. The Venn diagram is fascinating. It's a very interesting little concept, and it's not a lot of it found in the board game world. Like Nitwit, I believe, is the only game I can really think of, that uses that kind of a thing. So it's really like an untapped kind of market in a way for board gamers. Really, really kind of fascinating. So this is an interesting way to do that. However, I do feel like it is very difficult to figure out what the actual rule is, and you're kind of just like, well, hopefully that's the right one. I don't know. So, but it is really, so it's really well done, though, the game in more of a plus side. It's kind of like, Decrypto in terms of like how easy it is to understand. So if you've never played Decrypto, the idea that like, when you look at this, I'm like, when you first read the rules and you're like, okay, I guess it feels like it's going to be really hard. But once you play for like 1 or 2 rounds, like, oh, I get it. It seems to be like much easier. So it has a little bit it's not so intuitive in terms of how to play. I think you're going to explain how to play this game and everybody's going to be like, yeah, I think I get they might understand the mechanisms, but they might not quite get how they're going to play. But then that becomes apparent pretty quickly. So the learning curve for it it seems like it might be a little bit daunting, but it is also nice on the plus side that they have the ability to really scale it. You can play with 1, 2, or 3 rings. Again, I think it's kind of crazy to not play with 3 because the Venn diagram is what makes it interesting. And then, of course, having that scalability with the rules themselves, having the 1 to 3. So that's 3 stars. So that's kind of a cool thing. This definitely seems like the kind of game in the experience I've had with it is like either, and I should really note out here that I've only played the cooperative version. I haven't had enough players to play the competitive version, which is another thing, like playing 3 or more players. Some people have a hard time with that. I played mostly board games solo or occasionally 2 players, and so I've only played the cooperative version. But the spirit of the game is much the same. You're racing against the clock, and the one clock is an artificial clock in the cooperative game, and the competitive game, the clock is the other players. So, and that's kind of a good check in the right column for it as well, because I like the idea that, whenever somebody says like, well, you can play this game cooperatively or competitively, I'm like, no, because it's probably going to be bad. But in this case, I think they made the games very, very similar, and it's much better, I think, for the knower to play cooperatively. So that's kind of a cool thing. Again, like the word structure one seems like really, really easy, and sometimes I played games where it's like, oh, I have no, it might be like it has to have an O or something, and you're like, well, I have no words with O's in them, so that rule will never come into play for the whole game, which is kind of weird. So the game, this definitely seems like a kind of a swinging game. Like you might have a very, very easy time, or you might have a really brutal time. And I think overall, just to kind of like sum up my feelings on the game, this does feel a little maybe not innovative isn't the right word, but it does feel clever. It's an interesting untapped thing. Like you don't really see a lot of Venn diagram games. It's a very clever way of putting it all together. Nice little package, inexpensive game. Easy to learn, doesn't seem like it's going to be, but it is easy to learn. And it has those 2 modes of play, which I think is really cool. And I think ultimately, each of the games you play, you might play like 2 or 3 games and be like, those are all duds. They were either too easy or too hard or whatever. Like they just kind of but then you might play a game and be like, that was extremely fascinating and really interesting. So I think from a design standpoint as well, it is kind of an interesting little game. And I think that most gamers should try it, because I think it is has some very interesting way of going about doing things, and a bit of a logical thing. I think people that like those like sort of logic games, like the Sid Jackson games, like the Sleuth or whatever, those types of games where you're kind of quietly thinking, might enjoy this kind of a game. So hopefully that review, that overview and my thoughts on the game help you decide whether this game is for you or not. But for now, I gotta roll.